I was actually on maternity leave at the time when it began. We were visiting family in the US, where I grew up for a number of years, and the borders closed. We couldn't get back to the UK. And I was speaking to friends on the front line who were really struggling to communicate. And then I read an article in the news about a patient who'd been to the ICU with COVID and was terrified because he couldn't understand healthcare staff through the PPE. So I thought, well, people must be writing notes on paper to communicate, and that's not scalable at all for a pandemic. So there was this kind of global crisis in communication and healthcare. And so I thought, well, if we made those notes digital, it would really enable patients and staff to communicate clearly, because they could choose the note from an A to Z library on a website, and then they could use it to kind of guide that conversation. So Tim's background is I'm medical, as you said, an anesthesiologist. Tim's is e-commerce, branding, communications, and so he saw how we could easily build a website that was scalable and intuitive, and it was concept to launch in 72 hours. So it was really rapid. Tim built the website, we did the name, the logo, and just kind of got something out there.
We pulled 2 all-nighters. We just sat there at the table next to the kitchen. Rachel wrote the content. She says, I built the platform, and we just went for it, not really knowing what was going to happen. And then 2 days later launched it. Yeah,
it was really, really rapid. And then within the first 3 weeks, so within about 24 hours, we were encouraged to join Twitter, which I'd never written a tweet before. So I thought, here goes. And so we had a friend of mine shared it, and another friend shared it on Twitter. And then within 3 weeks, we had 8,000 users from 50 countries. It just spread like wildfire. And then in that time, Tim's done work with the Department for International Trade before, and they were really supportive after Tim reached out to them, and they got us some media coverage through the BBC and the Guardian, which went international. And then we had feedback from all around the world, which was, there are so many long-standing barriers to good communication in healthcare. The pandemic, the refugee crisis, kind of highlights all of that. But I know from my clinical experience of over 12, nearly 13 years now, that patients that speak different languages, that are deaf, blind, have learning disabilities, or a whole range of cognitive problems like stroke, dementia, autism, etc., or literacy issues, are illiterate or have poor literacy, health literacy. This is a huge group of patients that make up nearly 50% of the population, and they suffer huge health inequities and more risk at getting sick or dying, longer waits for operations and surgeries, prolonged length of stay in hospital. They are less compliant with their medication. They have more mental health issues, and all of that taken together massively burdens the kind of healthcare systems as well, financially. So that was very much the driver, was kind of my background, clinical experience, knowing that in my experience there's a huge gap in service provision, and then kind of taking that together with the current ask, if you like, from across the world as to can we make CardMedic sustainable. We kind of went from there.
Yeah, that was a huge moment for us, and we were recommended to apply for a grant at the time, and the grant was very much about helping during the pandemic and then having something that's scalable beyond, and it really focused our minds on how we could do that in a meaningful way. Initially, when we first launched it, I was looking at different platforms we could use, and there's a few out there. So Squarespace being one, there's Shopify, there's lots of WordPress and so on. And from my experience in the past, we weren't really looking for an e-commerce platform. We were just looking for something that was very scalable, but also beautifully designed from a simplicity point of view, because at the core of what we do, we need to make sure we can impart information clearly. And surprisingly, there's not many platforms that do that. There's a lot that have huge amounts of tech, but not many that are just very clean and simple and nicely structured. And so to get something done really quickly, we landed on Squarespace because it's so clear, it's so simple to use.
Even I could use it. Yeah. That's how easy it is. I could upload content and categorize it, so I was happy.
Yeah, so for that reason, it just really made sense to get something going. And the other thing I looked at was integrations, knowing that there were a few features we wanted, so different languages, for example, and read aloud, so it could be read aloud in different languages too, and Squarespace allowed for that. So I then got in touch with some different companies, one in France and one in the Philippines, that could help with that technology, just to plug it in initially as a version 1. And they, again, during the early days of the pandemic, everyone wanted to help. So they just said, yeah, sure, we'll do whatever we can. We'll plug in the system and get it going with you. so we set that up again it was a matter of hours to get the plugin working. And then suddenly we had this really content rich system that enabled it to be translated, enabled it to be read aloud, and scaled. So that was the starting point, and that's really what we launched with. And then very quickly after that, we thought we need this to be in an app format.
Being an anesthesiologist for over sort of 12 years now, I was able to initially write a lot of the content around critical care. I've done lots of critical care training in my time. It's not my sort of subspecialty, but I've done lots of it. And obviously the kind of anesthetics related stuff around cesarean sections, epidurals and labor, that sort of thing. So I was able to write content that I knew about, that I was comfortable with, because our content library is based upon hundreds of years of clinical experience. So each part is written by a different healthcare or allied healthcare professional that's volunteered and come forward. And it's based upon knowledge that you get from books, of course, and kind of your kind of learning and from college and university. And then the rest is your experience that you have working on the front line and dealing with patients and seeing how your seniors, maybe your residents and attendings talk to patients, for example, or other in nursing or physiotherapy, etc. And you start to create your own script in your head, or your own patter about how you talk to people about certain problems, or the way you might take a history, for example. And so we developed those series of scripts based upon the people almost downloading their brains. Like, I do this all day, every day, so I know exactly what I need to say in this scenario. And people just came out from all over the country, contacted us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, emailed us from the website, having read about us in the news. That initial content library, I had this amazing critical care nurse that I've worked with before that wrote some critical care nursing content, and then some midwives that contributed, and then a dentist, and it just grew from there, audiologist, radiotherapist, and it just grew and grew and grew. And it was people still getting in contact now. I'm meeting with a pediatric endocrinologist from Mexico tomorrow, who really wants to help write some content for kind of children with diabetes and other hormone issues and things. So it's, people, they love the idea, they love what we're trying to achieve, and just want to help contribute. As we build CardMedic, one of the bits of technology that we'll be building is the ability for people to author their own cards as well, which will obviously help that content library just grow and grow, a bit like Wikipedia, almost crowdsourced information as well, which will obviously have to go through kind of accuracy and quality checks, but will really allow that to grow.
Our aim is to grow rapidly, and therefore we've got to have commercial targets and aims to do that, to share CardMedic with more people. And Golden Section, just from the beginning, like we were saying earlier, felt completely aligned. You're nice people, which is a really good starting point, and we believe we are too. And I think that makes a huge difference culturally. We're similar in that sense, and we share similar values, but also the fact that you've got that unique set of experience, the development side, the technical side, and the growth side, and the playbooks that you can introduce. Again, going back in past experience, that's really rare. You don't get that every day. And journeying together, I think, as your strapline says, is something that you don't just say it, we actually have sensed that, and we've experienced that from the beginning of work.
You've walked the path of being founders, the pain points and the reality of it. And so that I think we hugely value that.
My background was, I'm still a director of a retail business, a menswear business. We'd come over to the States as on a family holiday, with Rachael being on maternity leave. And I'd come over just overnight to help with the children, bring them to the States, and I was flying back for a project for 2 weeks. And so I did the project, came back, no idea the pandemic was about to start, and then everything happened. And that's to the earlier conversation, how CardMedic founded. But alongside that, Rachael was feeling really helpless, being away from the UK and unable to help on the front line. And I was, my business at the time was in crisis, so it was really struggling, because it sells. It's still going now, and actually it's doing really well. But it sells menswear for events and weddings and so on. And with the pandemic and lockdowns, there were suddenly no events. So it was a really challenging time. I was helpless abroad, other than just kind of keeping in touch with the team and my business partner. And that was, quite a long journey of recovery. So for me, I was very keen to stay on board in some capacity with that business to see it through those difficult times. But meanwhile, we were, as I say, serendipitously setting up CardMedic, having not planned to, but we could see a huge vision for it and how it could help the greater good in that sense. So during that time frame, for me, I started to scale back my involvement in my other business, and my business partner took it on from there. And then Rachael, with her medical side, on return to the UK, just finding the balance. But again, being used to that crazy hours, crazy work ethic, the founder lifestyle, as it were, and kind of finding a way through and the adventure that brings with it.
Yeah, and I think there's something, on a very kind of personal note that we've never shared before, but at the very beginning, when this all started, on a kind of very sort of personal family point of view, because of Tim's business in crisis, as he said, and being a founder or director of that business, he couldn't receive furlough from the UK government. So overnight, on Tim's birthday, we found out he wouldn't get furlough. So we lost 80% of our family income literally overnight. And I was on maternity pay, and we had to use up all of our savings. We had to take the children out of childcare. So whilst we were on vacation, they were then due to go back, but we just said we can't afford the nursery fees. We had to have them at home. So we had them at home for the first 15 months of doing CardMedic. We had 3 children around, initially there was 3 under 3.5, around 24/7. So it was really challenging. We also had to take a mortgage holiday. We just bought a house that we were doing up. We had to end up renting out and eventually selling. So it was a really challenging time for us financially.
And I had to rebuild my business back home remotely from scratch. So, team down to almost 0 from 60, and build it back up and get it into a position of health again. So that was kind of happening in the background, right at the foreground, really, alongside all of this, and not knowing what the future would hold. So it was trying to find the balance of getting that back into strength, and then being able to move to helping more and working more on CardMedic, and over the course of months and years, which is how we got to where we were.
Yeah, so it was, we've survived. When we're a planner, well, I love a plan. Tim likes a plan too, I think. And but I had, we had our lives mapped out, and I thought, I'm going to do this and do this and do this. And obviously the pandemic hit and everything kind of went up in the air. And I think so many things happened to us personally in the first year. And since then, having sold a house, moved twice in 9 months, bought a house, big moves, moved the children's schools 3 times, like loads of family, personal stuff happening in the background, and loads of financial pressure. If you'd have told us in advance all the things that were going to happen to us, we would have run a country mile, but we had no choice but to get on and do it. So that's what we did.
And I think,
we got through it.
What happens, there's the saying, you make your own luck. And I think there's a balance. You do get luck, but equally, if you really work hard and also focus on where you're trying to go and have some kind of aim that spurs you on, then you somehow find a way of achieving it. And often when there's pressures like that, everything seems like it's falling apart almost. And it was the same with the pandemic for everyone, who was thinking what's going to happen with the future. It just shifts your mind, and you have to adapt. And that's effectively what we did. Yeah. And the children, they were young enough to not really be concerned. They were amazing, and they just responded with grace and as much as they could and got on with it.
Played together. They were genuinely superstars. Our youngest was 6 months when we started CardMedic, and she spent more than half her life in the US before we finally flew home, and so she was terrified seeing loads of people in masks because we were basically on lockdown. We just worked solid. I mean, I often didn't leave the house for 3 days running, just writing content. Tim was trying to help with CardMedic, do his own business, look after the kids. We were staying with my parents, so they helped with the kids as well. So it was a kind of real family effort, and we were working out of the garage and the driveway, and just working where we could. It was a really, really challenging start to it all. But we got to this point.
But somehow it's exciting as well. I mean, that's the thing. I have bizarrely fond memories of sitting in the driveway in Florida where we started CardMedic, and then in the garage, setting it up. And there were definitely long hours and kind of challenging moments, but it's a rush as well to try and create something and build something new and under pressure in that way. It's a rush just doing it, and creating something new, not knowing what's around the corner, and building something. And when you're doing that, you can look back and think, we did this. If we hadn't done this, it wouldn't be here. And I think that's incredibly fulfilling.
I think for me, being a founder is obviously never something that I had as part of my life plan. And being an anesthesiologist I love it as a career, but it's a funny one because sometimes your job is just really stable. Some people describe it as boring. I actually really like just having one patient at a time. I do my charts. It's all nice and organized and planned. And I really like that kind of stability and the predictability. But at the same time, I really love the rush of the on-calls, the emergency stuff, and kind of just flying by the seat of your pants, as it were, just, firefighting, figuring out as you go. I love that as well with anesthetics. So the same goes for kind of being a founder, apart from you don't get the boring predictability side, you just get the constant fly by the seat of your pants side. And so I think there are parts of it that I really, really relish and enjoy, the kind of buzz of constantly meeting new people from all across the world. The fact for me, a whole new part of my brain's been opened up. Business, new technology, accelerators, doing programs in the US, Mass Challenge, She Loves Tech in Singapore, accelerators in the UK, The Hill, the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Program. And that's just opened up my brain and my eyes to so many different possibilities, and just gives you a kind of wider view on the world, but also relevant to healthcare. You then learn more about procurement in healthcare and how people kind of sales into all sorts of things around healthcare and management and leadership. And so I think being a founder kind of definitely sort of draws on that side of my personality, where I love just that kind of instant problem solving, and where you feel you've got that energy, like, right, just get this done, and kind of getting the momentum with people contributing. But there's bits of it that are definitely stressful around, the long hours, obviously, the kind of stress about, there's loads of things, sales and all sorts of things that come with it. And that bit I find challenging because it's not, there is that side of my personality that likes the stability and the predictability of things as well. So last night I literally put in our calendar a lunch break every day for half an hour. Like, we're just putting in a lunch break, and then one night a week where we are having a date night. It's at home. We're just going to hang out, but we're not going to be working. And kind of putting that in the calendar. We try not to work on weekends now. We had no boundaries before. My clinical shifts are 2 days a week, but for example, I have nights coming up this week for 2 nights. So trying to make sure I don't work in the days, though it's not always possible. But then I'll have some, like, next week, some time off to kind of make up for that. So it sort of balances out. So I think for us, it's about just making sure that we have some kind of breathing space in the day. And literally we are, like, as of now, trying to build in lunch breaks and one night a week. We have been trying for a while not to work at weekends. We try not to look at our phones in the evening, like we say kind of beyond 8 o'clock, but it gets to about 10:30 and we're like, right, we really should be off our phones now. So just being stricter with that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And there's an article I was reading actually 2 days ago about a guy who founded 6 businesses. He's just turned 40. He's on to his 7th business now. Has done incredibly well, and he was giving a very honest depiction of what it's like, growing a business, setting up, and so on and so forth, and finding balance. And he was making the point that, he builds in a certain amount of sleep every day. He builds in time to stop, certain, hobbies and so on that he enjoys. And it's a bit like parenting, in that to be a good parent, you've got to be happy in yourself. So, happy person, happy parent, kind of analogy. And the same with the business, that I think it's very easy just for it all to be a blur, as I'm sure you know. And, you're just doing all the crazy hours in the day and more to try and keep up. And if you don't build in those times to break or to do the things you're passionate about, then you can lose perspective. So whether it's, if you like running, or if you like climbing, or whatever it may be.
I don't like climbing.
Or even reading, or like meditating. It can be anything that makes you happy and you have fun doing, to make sure you keep those in place, just to find that balance. I think then you're more inspired when you're working on something to keep going.
And more efficient,
the long game
as well. Yeah, I think we try to eat healthily as well. Like Tim's better at building in time for exercise than I am, although you don't do as much as you want to or you used to. But I kind of do like a sprint of a couple of weeks where I'm like, I'm really getting into it. And then something will happen and I'm like, I'm out of it again. And then it can just kind of go through those vicious cycles. But I really like walking. So walking the dog or going out with the kids, like just covering a lot of ground. And when I do my clinical shifts, I do 15,000 steps in a day, because I walk. My kind of round trip from the station and back is about 3 miles, so I walk that every day, and then it's a lot of walking at work as well. So I think for me, trying to build that in and eating healthily, we like cake, but we do eat very healthily. I mean, who doesn't?
That's balance. Cake and veggies.
Cake and vegetables. Yeah.
Cake is big on our list.
Yeah, cake is like number one. In fact, our son's first sentence was "Mama cake" when he was like 1. So yeah, it's a big part of our lives. But not that I'm very good at baking, but we do eat it. But yeah, I think we eat healthily, and we definitely, I think there's a lot out there where people try and portray that they've got it all sorted out and their life is perfect. But as Tim said in this article a couple of days ago, that's the picture people portray, but it's not the reality. And our reality is we haven't got it all sorted, but we're trying. We've done a lot of traveling. As Tim said, we've been together over 20, it will be 21 years in August. And so we were lucky. We got married after 8.5 years. We had children. No, we got married at 10 years, engaged at 8.5 years together, married at 10 years, started having children when we've been together for 15 years. So in that 15-year time frame, we did manage to do a lot of traveling. But one of the places there's 2 places that we've talked a lot about going that we've never been to. One is South America, that we'd love to go to, but when we were younger and students, we couldn't afford the flights. It was so expensive. And the other is I'd love to go on a safari. We've talked about that for years, because photography is like wildlife photography is a really big passion of mine.